Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the purchase agreement. And then I'm just going to go through the purchase agreement. I don't know what questions you might have had, so I won't necessarily be recording the answers to your questions, but I'm going to go ahead and go through with this purchase agreement. So when I first started in real estate, the purchase agreement was probably about, I want to say, 8 pages. And then as the years went by, 10 pages, 12 pages, 14 pages is what we were with before this new purchase agreement started coming out. So now the purchase agreement is 18 or 16 pages. The way they formatted it has, brought it to extend to 16 pages, but that's not the whole of the contract. When you're all done with a purchase agreement, you're going to probably have about 80 total payment or 80 total pages. So let's go ahead and start. So it's known as the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. And the reason they add that and joint escrow instructions is because the title and escrow company take this document and they use this document to establish the conditions of escrow, who pays for what, who's entitled to what. So how they've rearranged this purchase agreement is in sections, so that now you're no longer looking all the way through the contract to try to find out where things are. Now they've grouped things together so that, for example, what are the terms, when you want to know the terms of the purchase agreement and the allocation of costs, in other words, who's paying for what, there's one section that you can go to and it's all right there. So they've kind of made it easier and quicker for us to get through the transaction or the contract. Now, the purchase agreement is actually a legal document. It's something that an attorney really should be drawing up. But we as real estate agents can't always be calling an attorney every time we want to sell a house. So what they have done with the purchase agreement is they've created it with an attorney, and all we need to do as agents is fill in the blanks, check the boxes. So we're kind of doing what attorneys do, only we're just putting in the pertinent information. So let's start with the top part of the agreement. And I'm talking about item number 1, where it says offer. And this information should be as correct as you possibly can get it. Make sure that everybody's name is spelled correctly. Make sure the address is exactly the address that is the property. The assessor's parcel number must be correct, because if that's incorrect, then that makes this contract null and void. So how you find that information is you can go into the MLS and go under the tax feature, type in the address, and it'll give you the assessor's parcel number. So now the terms of the agreement. First of all, before you can even write a contract, you have to identify who the agents are. And in this little section here, in item 2 for agency, you were also going to have a disclosure page, a page that talks about who we are. But in addition to that, we need to confirm our agency relationship in the agency disclosure section. And we would identify if we're representing the seller only, or both the seller and the buyer, which would be called a dual agency. And then under the buyer's brokerage firm, we identify if we're only representing the buyer or both the buyer and the seller. And then, of course, you sign it. And if you are representing more than one buyer, or if you are representing the buyer and the seller, then there's you need to check one of the boxes and then provide a form called the ABA. And that's all in here. So you'll be able to see exactly what you need to do based on the situation that you're in. And one thing I like about this new contract under item 3, they have the terms and the allocation of costs all in one place. And so when you want to know the purchase price, you can just come here, you can see it under additional terms. You can see that it's an all cash, right away. This is an all cash deal. You can see when you're closing escrow. And something a lot of agents don't realize is contracts expire. And in this section, C, you see the expiration of the offer, and you can just go with 3 days after the buyer signs, or you can place a date in here as to when the contract expires. And sellers don't have to do anything. If they decide they don't like the offer, they don't have to counter, they don't have to reject the offer. They can just simply not do anything, and then the contract expires. So that's an important date when you're representing a buyer. You want to just kind of pay attention to that date and know when it's time to move on. If the seller hasn't responded in 3 days or whatever the date is, then you can assume they didn't want the offer, and the buyer's not held to that offer either. You can just kind of scroll down. I'm just going to assume that everybody read through the purchase agreement, and that way I can get through this a little more quickly, so that you're not being held up and held hostage to the explanation of the purchase agreement. So you can see where you put the initial deposit, the increased deposit. Here's where you can see where the loan information is. And what I like about this is the additional terms. You could see right away if it's an FHA or VA, and automatically if it's an FHA. If either of these boxes are checked, if it's FHA or VA, then you know that you're going to need an additional addendum form, and it tells you right here. And if you're using the California Association of Realtor zip forms, when you click on either of these boxes, it'll automatically generate that form into your list of forms that you're going to present to the seller. If there's any additional in E2, you can see if there's any additional amount of financing going on. Again, I love this additional terms section because you can see things quickly and you don't have to scroll through. And then, of course, taking everything into consideration, you get to your final purchase price. And when you're using the zip forms and you're clicking the boxes and adding in the amounts, this purchase price total down here will be automatically generated for you. And then let's pay attention to the very bottom of the page. On every page, you're going to have a place to put the buyer's initials, the seller initials, and many real estate offices are very particular about this. You might think, oh, it's just a missed initial, but it's very important because it denotes that the buyer and the seller both saw this page and they're aware of this page. So they initial. So every page of the contract does need to be initialed at the bottom. So we're just continuing here with, because it's overflow, so we're continuing with the terms of the contract with all of these items here. I like that we, here in section, in item J, the final verification of condition of the property, and you can put how many days before close of escrow that you want the buyer to be able to have the opportunity to view the property before he's actually obligated to purchase the property. Make sure it's in the condition that the buyer expected it to be in. So make sure that's adequate. 5 days before close of escrow is usually pretty good, because typically the seller has completed all the repairs and obligations to the contract. The assignment request, 17 days, usually 17 days is enough time to have your inspectors out and verifications made. So you can add more or less depending on how you want to present your contract. I like this section of the contingency removal times. And again, I'm just assuming everybody read through all of these contingency items. And basically you're just putting in the date. In California, we say 17 days is enough time, but I'm going to tell you that because of COVID-19, there is such a shortage of inspectors and people who can go out. If you think it won't jeopardize your buyer's position, you can put maybe 20 days here. But for now, if you want, just leave it at 17. You don't have to put anything in the blanks. Leave it at 17. And then if you see that your buyer needs more time, then you can fill out an addendum for that buyer. Here, I love, again, this final section over here on the far right. That's always I'm glad they added this, because you can see at a glance. You can see at a glance that if this box is checked, there's no loan contingency. You can see at a glance there if there's no appraisal contingency. You don't have to scroll through the entire document. There you go, right there. You can see. Possessions, this is section M, just itemizing what happens when escrow closes. Are the sellers still going to be in the property? Are the tenants going to be in the property? You just kind of have to see, what happens when you close. And upon notice of recording, which is the title company will let you know when you've recorded. And then you want to look through this box and check the appropriate box or write in the appropriate information. Now in section N, it documents fees and compliance. So here you're going to have a lot of documents in this transaction. So here you're identifying how long the sellers have to get that document, all their disclosures and things like that to the buyer. So typically 7 days, we're giving them a week to get all of the disclosures to the buyer. And if they don't, the buyer has an opportunity to just say, you know what, I don't want this property. So the title company, title and escrow, are going to send the seller information. And so you're just saying how many days people have to respond. You want to say how many days the title company has to give information to the buyer and seller. If there are homeowner association issues, or if there is a homeowner association, you want all of the fees and things paid 3 days after the transaction is accepted. That's something the seller would pay. Smoke alarms, things like that. You want all of those done. The water heater bracing, 7 days. You just want things done. And you're itemizing here when you want those things done. And you'd be surprised how many things a seller will take away from the property, and the buyer moves in and these things aren't here. I had a seller who wanted to remove the stove, and I'm like, no, you kind of need to leave the stove there. But you can read through all of these things, and the seller or the buyer, whoever's writing up this transaction can go through and, maybe the buyer doesn't want the washer and the dryer. They're old, they're decrepit, they don't want that left because now then they'll be stuck with how to get rid of it. So just go through and check the things that would be excluded from the sale. Now here it's interesting, they automatically check bathroom mirrors. I guess people take the bathroom mirrors, or they want the bathroom mirrors, or they don't want the bathroom mirror. It's just interesting that they automatically check that. So seller wants their bathroom mirror, so that's excluded from the sale. Allocation of cost, this is probably where you're going to be looking at this the most, and you need to pay really good attention to this area because it says who pays what in the transaction. It'll be the buyer, the seller, maybe both, and then in this area here you just put 50-50, and then you check what it is. The environmental hazard disclosure, I don't know why they didn't type that all the way out, but the environmental report, whatever report you're looking at, and you just say who pays for it. And it's a good idea to kind of get an idea of how much these reports cost. So for instance, I know that the natural hazard zone disclosure report can be obtained from anywhere from $49 to $99. And you just kind of have to be aware of the cost and when you're negotiating, because it's something where you might want to negotiate that your buyer will pay that. It makes your buyer look good, that they're taking on that cost, but it's only a $49 report. So you can say, well, the buyer's going to pay for that. And it just makes it look like, okay, we'll accept that. Here again, smoke alarm. I don't even know why they give it a choice, but smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater, and all that. Typically the seller will pay for that. Government. Okay, so let me go through each of these because as an agent, you just kind of want to know what's standard. So the government required point of sale inspections and reports. So I typically say seller because as an agent, I don't know what the government requirements are. I don't know what they are. And it actually isn't my job to know that. So I typically just put sellers to pay for those. And the reality of this is there's probably nothing they really need to worry about. If they're living in a house, they already know what the government requires. Same here in Q6, I just put seller. Escrow fees, now that's going to be a choice. You want to look up, and you can actually Google this to see who pays what in what county, the escrow fees. And sometimes in that county, the buyer pays. Sometimes, in other counties, the seller pays. And then there are counties that say both the buyer and the seller pay. And you can just say 50-50, or you can click each to pay their own fees. And typically in a transaction, the buyer fees are a little bit more than the seller fees. So that's something you just want to look at and see who pays what, typically in the county of the property that you're purchasing. The owner's title insurance policy, I typically put the seller because owner's title insurance policy, obviously the seller should pay for that. The buyer's lender title insurance policy, in this case, only the buyer can pay for that. County transfer tax. Now this one, typically I just say both and we split it down the middle, and that fee is usually not too much. It's $1.10 per $1,000 of the purchase price. So how you calculate that is you take the purchase price divided by 1,000, and then you multiply that by $1.10, and it's not that much. So typically I just say both of them. Same thing with the count. Oh, they're just telling me that I'm running out of time. So I've got 10 more minutes on this, and I will go through it pretty quickly because this part here is where we're going to spend most of the time anyway, and we're almost done. City transfer tax, just say both. Homeowners, sellers, the only one that can pay for that. Certification fee, buyer has to pay for that. Again, you're just going down, 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 and looking at who pays for what. Whenever I have a choice on who pays for what, I typically will say both if I don't know. And then they can always counter back. Okay. So now the rest of this, again, I'm assuming you read through all of these. And I'm just going to go quickly now under item 4. There's really nothing you need to do if it's a residential, regular single family home, but if it's anything other than that, then you want to go and check that. Again, other addendums, you can read through and see which addendums you're going to need, and you check which ones. Buyer and seller advisories, you can see these are already checked, and basically these are the only ones, the ones that are automatically checked. You just need to worry about those unless you look at your transaction and it's one of these other issues here. It's a bank-owned REO, then you want to check that, and then there's a form that goes with that. So here we talk about in section 5, additional terms affecting the purchase, and that's going to be your deposits, when deposits are increased, how long you can keep the deposit, when the deposit has to go to escrow, it talks about that. If it's all cash, which you would have identified up above. All of these things you would have identified up above, but it's this section here is just going through the ramifications for not adhering to what you've already decided. So this is just a matter of reading through it and understanding, because it's just helping you, the agent, be able to explain it to the buyer. Again, you've already identified when closing, item 7 here, closing and possession. You've already said when that's going to happen. Now this section is just explaining what happens if the sellers don't move out, and how much time they have to remedy everything. So the rest of these items, sorry, I don't have time to really go through them. If you have questions, please call me and let me know. But basically all the rest of this agreement is just a matter of reading it and understanding what the ramifications are if you don't go through with the transaction, whether or not the buyer chooses to get a home warranty. You're looking at 10C here. The rest of it, just kind of read through it and just kind of understand it. Lots and lots and lots and lots of what happens when you terminate, lots of disclosures, just explaining what some of these disclosures are. By number 12, buyer's investigation of the property and things that affect the property and what the buyer needs to know. Title and vesting. As an agent, we can't tell the seller or the buyer how to vest in title, but understanding it is going to be important to you so that you can help them to make that decision. Here, number 14, time periods, removal of contingencies. It just basically says what happens when you do or you don't adhere to the time frames. And item C, the seller's right to cancel and whether they get to keep the money on the buyer's deposit or not. Notice of buyer to or seller to perform. There's a document that you would need to fill out to make that happen, but in this section here, it just kind of talks about that. Number 15, repairs. When repairs need to be done, how repairs need to be done, who pays for it. You've already identified who pays for it above, but now we're just learning a little bit more about that. And so all the rest of this is just letting you know terminology, what things mean in the contract. In this section here, liquidated damages, you want to make sure you get signatures in this box, and at the bottom of the page. If either of those aren't checked, then it presents an issue with regard to arbitration and mediation. And then finally, you want to make sure you sign. I'm going to say here in this section where we're identifying the buyer and the seller agencies, check this box. Okay, we're in real estate brokers, the real estate broker section. You want to make sure you check the box that says delivery shall be made to the alternate designated electronic delivery address only. That's because you're going to be doing everything digitally, and you want to make sure that all the signatures and all the documents and everything can get to you digitally. Now we get finally to the escrow holder acknowledgement. There's nothing that you need to fill out in this section. This is when you are all done and everybody has accepted the agreement. Then the title company will fill out this section and then hand you back this page 16, with their signature and everything. And again, at the bottom of this page, you need to make sure that the buyer initials, seller initials. Here in this presentation of offer, the seller's broker signs it and dates it. And I think that's it. Oh, and offer not accepted. Again, remember, the seller doesn't have to do anything because the contract will expire, but they can acknowledge that they did not accept the offer, and that they're not going to counter or anything, that they didn't like the offer. So anyway, that's it. Sorry I had to go through it so quickly, but I thank you all for joining, watching, or listening to this presentation. And I hope that if you have any questions, that you give me a call. You all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.